Sophie Chevalier from the University of Picardy Jules Verne. Sophie is presenting her work today called Sharing Public Spaces After Apartheid, Durban, Durban Seafront. Sophie has prepared a PowerPoint presentation for us, so she will be presenting her work for 20 minutes, 20 to 25 minutes. She's joining us all the way from France, and she'd like but nervous about her English, so we give her some time. Once Sophie is done presenting, I will open the floor up to some questions. We're going to do one question and one answer at a time. Sophie, thank you, and I hand over to you.
Okay, so first I would like to thank the History Workshop Group, Nyogu and Sapana, and Noor Niftagodian for your invitation. I'm not very at ease addressing by Zoom in a different language, so I have a written paper I can give away, and here I will give you a short version of this paper. I have also a short PowerPoint with only a table of contents, some picture, and some references at the end. So, okay. No, nothing happened, so that's good. I'm sorry. Brilliant. Okay. So I'm a social anthropologist teaching and directing research in French University. I'm not an historian, but I have written about this topic with historian and published in a historical review. My main interest is in economic anthropology, especially in consumption and in anthropology of cities. I have carried out fieldwork in Paris, and I carry on to do that for a short time in London and then in Bulgaria during the 1990s, and finally in Durban since the last 15 years. My method combines ethnographic observation, interview, and research in archive. In South Africa, my focus is on the new middle classes, but as in Paris and London project, on the lower middle class. I'm looking at how the relationship between race and class are evolving in everyday life and in urban milieus. Here, the German sociologist Georg Simmel, a contemporary of Max Weber, is important for me. My main focus has been to explore how South Africans have adjusted to sharing public spaces that were segregated under apartheid. So the seafront is one of the space I'm exploring. Following Simmel, I'm interested in what he calls the spirit of metropolis. This opens up new possibilities beyond the traditional enclosure of social life. The modern city at first offers a chance for freedom of movement, but in times this gives way to the need to express self-identity. Is it possible to take a stroll through a racially mixed crowd, a stroll made possible by adhering to the rules of reserve that Simmel claims are peculiar to urban life? The Chicago School of Sociologists believes that civil indifference was a norm of an urban way of life. We may well ask if there really are places in South Africa where city dwellers can escape their assigned appearances, behavior, and uses of space. In Durban, there is one public space that attracts a racially mixed crowd where people appear to interact without a marked concern with identity, the seafront. I will talk today only of the promenade and the beach, showing how social interaction varies between them. We could walk, I could have been interested in the building along the Golden Mile or at Tambo Drive today. And I'm doing an ethnography of the building where I'm living, which is of course a bit tricky because if you want to carry on to live in, it's okay. The promenade is a site of free movement, but racial concentration are visible on the beach. Even mixed groups are more and more prominent. I have to say, since 10 years, I'm going to Durban and looking for the seafront. The transformation every year there are transformation. It's quite quick. So what I'm interested in here, or what I will contrast here, is mobility versus immobility. The seafront is political in that is an example of the new South African in action. Even under apartheid, as the novelist Louis Cozy pointed out in Mating Birds, the beach are greater social fluidity than elsewhere. Even Mating Birds end up quite badly, I have to say. But today, the social mixture of the developed seafront is visible, audible, and felt. This new seafront in Durban is largely the brainchild of its urban planner, Michael Sutcliffe, who made explicit his ideological conviction that the inhabitants must learn new ways of being together in a crowd. One can say that this space is a cosmopolitan canopy, as Anderson has described from some public spaces in Philadelphia, where racial coexistence is marked by civility, even by benevolence. My talk concerns what is exchange in this moment of fluidity on a continuum from feigned indifference and a minimal degree of civility to real shared interaction. I will start with the colonial transformation of the coastline into a leisure space, and I will talk then after about what is happening on the seafront today. So I will start with the first part, civilizing the coastline, creating a leisure space. So the seafront embodies Durban for its inhabitants, but also for tourists. It has long been a winter resort for Transvaal visitors, but today also foreign visitors. The crowd has a certain cosmopolitan character. Durban coastline was still a landscape of dune and vegetation in the late 19th century, so that one observer could claim that the magnificent ocean frontage of the borough still remains in an improved condition. Until the early 20th century, Durban turned its back on the sea as a source of contemplation and leisure. When the seafront was first developed as a leisure area, this follows the British model. The French historian Alain Corbin wrote The Lure of the Sea, the discovery of the seaside in the Western world, 1750-1840. The first resort were inland spa and seaside resort, created in England as early as the 1750s, equated seawater and breezes with a health function. It still is apparent also in the seafront in Durban, because the two main hospitals, the main hospital, Addington Hospital, is on seafront, and the Children's Hospital is also on the seafront. So they bought the relationship between sea breeze and seawater and health. So aristocracy led the way in inventing this maritime landscape with the gradual democratization of sea bathing. Seaside resort became more socially differentiated, and the beach was sometimes divided by class and gender. A specific architecture emerged, given prominence to piers, especially in the north of Europe. Fishermen were relegated to the picture roles. The area was civilized by stripping out its wilder elements and excluding the native. Back to Durban. In 1889, the main street was extended to the sea, and a hotel and some houses were built. In 1901, John Fletcher, Durban's chief engineer, was given the task of developing the seafront apart from the port activities. Two problems arose then that are still relevant today: the presence of sharks in the coastal waters and the destruction caused by monsoon storms. A long net prevented sharks from getting too close to the shoreline, and sand was pumped into the harbor to maintain the beaches. Many buildings were built up during the 20th century, many in Art Deco style. The number of hotels accelerated from the 1950s, all reserved for white people until the 90s. The promenade was eventually extended to 8 kilometers. It reaches beyond the Suncoast Casino in the north and to Ushaka Marine World and the point entrance to the port in the south. The municipality has made several additions in order to develop the city tourist appeal. The last rehabilitation of the promenade was for the 2010 Football Cup. I will show you a picture in the 60s. I have to say also, I have a small collection of postcards, and I have to, well, I think all postcards show only white people. I will be pleased if somebody can find me a postcard with non-white people on. So these developments reaffirm the strictly leisure character of the area. Subsistence fishermen, despite numerous protests, have been expelled from several piers, but they come again and again. That's also a picture. The organization of the seafront under colonial rule and apartheid was motivated by social control over crowds. Here, whites were a self-appointed racial aristocracy who fixed how it has to be used and by whom. These rules were at first informal, then there was a series of formal rules, so probably you know them. The Reservation of Separate Amenity Act of 1953 stipulates that urban amenities must be segregated, including Durban seafront. I like to mention also the Witchcraft Suppression Act of 1957, which prohibited all religious practices related to the sea, reinforcing the leisure aspect of the coastline. In 1972, municipalities have the obligation to organize beaches according to apartheid rules and enforce them. Here I will show you a map of the beaches in Durban in the 80s. So you see the beaches were separated, but also the playground was reserved only for white kids. And they created a multiracial beach in the early 80s between the white beach and colored beach. Now, of course, the Durban seafront has been open to everybody for some 30 years. In the 2000s, the seafront was explicit redeveloped to make it welcoming to all for the football World Cup. The municipality set out to create a new social space as part of the political and ideological project, incorporating colonial architecture into a cosmopolitan form. Today, the promenade is an urban public space with a non-commercial purpose, even there is a restaurant and so on, whose use is shared by a crowd of walkers who rub shoulders with each other, and I will describe now how they appropriate the space. So is the second part, strolling along the promenade together. The crowd strolls slowly, sharing a communal ritual, often weekly. The Italian term passeggiata combines strolling with observing each other. People observe each other, how they are dressed, often a little dress up. Even Durban people have the reputation to be dressed down, but not too much. Who is with who? Sometimes you meet people you know, you exchange a few words, give each other a news, joke, then you carry on. Some figures on the promenade are almost invisible figures because they are part of the scenery, such as policemen, women in the cleaning brigade, lifeguards, photographers with Polaroid cameras, metal hunter with their long poles, seller of soft drinks and sweets with their small hand-cart and bells, ice cream, sunglasses, plastic bottles for seawater. There is only one figure who claims a specific ethnicity as Zulu, the rickshaw puller. That's a postcard of 1940, who was sent by, I think, French visitor to France in Europe. Commercial activity are tightly controlled. There are few informal traders. There is no street food. Food is only available from well-known chain. Strolling on the promenade is a way of putting oneself on display. The French have a special word for this, flâneur. Quick glances are exchanged, allowing for mutual recognition and possible connection. The flâneurs spot differences in appearance between them, racial, social, genders, leading them to identify types of individuals. But all, except for beggars and hustlers, are following the rule of reserve, like Simmel described, or civility, like Anderson described. Being part of this dance crowd, taking pleasure in strolling, this can outweigh any strangeness or temptation to withdraw into one's community. Coexistence is possible because its very plasticity, given the freedom for adjustment between distance and proximity, openness and withdrawal. In certain situations, race become relevant again, but this is less related to person than to places, because historically mutual categorization was first rooted in space. Colette Pétonnet, which is one of the founders of the urban anthropology in France, suggests that immobility is less compatible with indifference, as is a feeling of belonging to a crowd when it's become thinner. This is particularly true of the beach in contrast to the promenade. So my third part is setting on the beach. The promenade is a space of mobility and fluidity of circulation, but the beach is a space of immobility with a great proximity of bodies on dress. Beaches remain racially differentiated, but more as an idea than in practice. The North Beach is more for white and Indian, and the South more for African. The contrast is rooted in all racial discourses that oppose the white, clean, organized part of the beachfront to the more popular, predominantly African beaches. This opposition also articulates racial and social judgment about the middle class North and the more working class South. When I was telling people that I have a flat in the South Beach, they was really puzzled how a white woman can buy or have a flat in South Beach. Most part of the beach today are racially mixed with preferences reflecting practical as well as ideological reasons. The cohabitation of bodies on the beach is quite an art. Material adjustment of distance between these bodies with nothing material, infrastructure, to construct and constrain the space for interaction. People define it with their bodies. Henri Lefebvre said, each body is a space and has its own space because it produces itself and the space. When a family arrives on the beach, heavily laden, the father takes the lead. He soon finds a spot not too far from the shore. The children undress, ready to rush into the water. But if their parents want to go with them, they must first locate another bather to protect their belonging. A choice must be made to contact someone and formalize the surveillance. Of several criteria, one is apparent race, often one's arm. But white women are also sometimes preferred, like me. I'm often surrounded by beach bags and the rest, making it hard to go swimming myself. If I ask people, why me? They are surprised, embarrassed, or evasive at best. My racial appearance is never mentioned, but often my gender or age. Sometimes my hardly innocent query is interpreted as a refusal to help them. Of course, it's not enough to put your thing next to a neighbor. You have to convince them, and that means entering into interaction, and initial reluctance is more common. In short, this is a question of balancing security and anonymity, of opening up to others without imposing oneself too much. The term security can be understood both as protecting one's possessions, but also, it seems to me, as protecting oneself from other strong intrusion from others in a situation of relative vulnerability within a discourse of mutual protection. This strategy for adjusting to the environment requires a knowledge of the categories that structure society and ability to make judgment concerning individual. So, fourth part, seafront in time space. So the promenade has a public character which make it an urban place that must be shared and open to everyone. Some of cohabitation are fixed because they are collective and seasonal, like holidays, especially winter holidays, summer holiday, Christmas holiday in South Africa. Some are more specific and linked to membership of religious, sporting, competitive running, for example, or political groups. But all are part of the history of the city. My two examples here are both religious in character. The first take place on a regular basis most Saturday in a sort of niche, and other people have to adjust to it. The second takes up the promenade during a weekend once a year and integrates the strollers in his wake. The Shembe Church followers arrive at South Beach in taxi from the township or the province, wearing their white dresses. These women are with a male band in uniforms who descend on a portion of the beach in musical procession for an hour or two to perform rituals. They take place in the early morning, but they do not disturb swimmers or beachgoers. By mid-morning, the church members leave in their taxis. In contrast, the Chariot Festival is a seasonal event, a weekend in April. This year it was Easter Sunday, and much larger in its number and use of space. This festival is organized by the devotee of Hare Krishna as a 5-kilometer parade of 3 carts and attracts a lot of people. This year it was on the Oertambo Drive because the municipality forbidden them to use the promenade, and it was only 1 cart because of pandemic. The promenade becomes a religious space for a day. The occupants of the cart distribute oranges as sweets to children. Both events transform the sounds and colors of both promenade and beach for a time, and the city's religious diversity is staged. These two religious communities assert their existence in a common space that belongs to all the city inhabitants. They connect the city with its townships and its rural interior, in the case of the Shembe Church, and with the global constellation of Krishna communities. Occupying public space. I now turn to nighttime activity on the seafront, since the alteration between day and night is central to its social rhythm. The promenade and the beach are almost completely empty after nightfall, except during the summer holiday. People start to arrive in the promenade on 5:30 in the morning, and after 8 there is very few people. But some of its car parks become places of high sociability, notably at the Blue Lagoon in the north and South Beach. Jam-packed cars with their African drivers, men with only a few women, stay there until the small hours. They start to settle. Booths lids are open and tables and chairs taken out, along with alcoholic drinks and food, sometimes even barbecues. Car doors are left open to achieve maximum impact of thundering, repetitive music. Drivers roar the engine before parking, and bikers ride across the car park on one wheel in a spectacular display of masculinity. Movement between informal groups for dancing, chatting, and arguing is fluid. Their sound bubble excludes potential users of these nighttime public spaces. Leslie Bong, a South African anthropologist, described this phenomenon for East London's waterfronts as Occupy urbanism. He analyzed it as a social strategy of a single African lower middle class man to appropriate their city from which they have been historically excluded. He gave to this festive activity a political dimension. In Durban, Africans were formally excluded from the seafront until the late 1980s, beginning of 90s, since all residential buildings there were reserved for white. Also, the inhabitants of these buildings, such as ours, are racially mixed. Africans are more often tenants than owners. Of course, this gathering keeps many local residents awake at night. Several attempts have been made to chase away these party goers, or at least control their house, but with little success. If locals often complain privately, they recognize that there has to be a place for this nighttime user of the seafront, at least in the car parks. So in conclusion, I have tried to show that the development of the seafront took place during an era of colonial segregation and then of apartheid. Since the 1990s, The seafront has become an open space for all, but the municipality 2010 transformation gave it a genuinely collective dimension. It is therefore a new space formed by a political and ideological project. The seafronts get a lot of attention from the municipality, public opinion, the media, and tourist-related businesses. This peaked last year when the insurrection led to pollution of the sea. And the last month, after the floodings, I will say after 2 days after the floodings, there was already a cleaning brigade of women cleaning up the beach, and then excavator putting out the trunks. So it was very quick after the flooding, and you can wonder if there was not more important thing to do. But anyway, it was okay, it was nice. As a public space, the seafront embodies freedom of movement, the possibility of becoming part of a larger collective, of losing oneself in the crowd. Civil indifference was conceived of by Simmel as a necessary mutual reserve between city inhabitants. This attitude will allow co-presence and avoid urban conflicts because the multitude of contacts, density, and variety of individuals in the city. The promenade seems to be a place where racial identity is not longer significant for actors in movement. Peaceful cohabitation and staging of urban, racial, social, and religious diversity together is encouraged there. This possibility of having space and time to oneself on the seafront bear comparison with Anderson's cosmopolitan canopy. Historically, in South Africa, to be part of a crowd, to become one with a collective, to feel and see oneself as part of the whole has been an exceptional practice. One example is provided by Jennifer Robinson paper on the 1936 Imperial exhibition in Johannesburg and the Jubilee processions that went with it. This has created a racially shared but hierarchical public space. This exhibition had the ambition to celebrate an inclusive South African identity embodied in the modernity and cosmopolitanism of the city. Its space was a site of social and racial interaction with white and blacks as both subjects and spectators. The politics of this intangible on Durban seafronts, from the festive crowd mentioned earlier to the daytime flâners along the promenade. People can situate it themselves in relation to each other, physically experiencing in sight, sound, and smell the political issue of racial mixing and observing Durban transformation daily. City dwellers and tourists alike can see themselves in a reflexive, lay ethnography that allows them to act just to other people and circumstances and to construct new forms of social interaction. Racial differences do, of course, sometimes reappear and may threaten social equilibrium for a time, but never to the point of destroying this cosmopolitan canopy. Under this canopy, people meet each other, not just as individuals, but as members of a community whose knowledge is often abstract and prejudiced. What is communicated there goes beyond the limits of bodies and even the space itself. All social life is local at first, but the mixing of the seafront affects the whole city and far beyond. Thank you. That's I think I keep the time.
Yeah, you did keep the time. Thank you so much for that presentation. I'm going to open the floor to any questions. We're going to do one question at a time so that we don't overwhelm Sophie. So I open the floor to questions.
Mm.
You're welcome to raise your hand or just unmute to ask a question.
Okay, let me ask a question. Just on a very small part of what you presented was the floods and what happened with the beaches and what happened when the floods occurred and the beaches were cleaned up. Who cleaned up? Who came? How does that reflect your overall thesis?
Of course, the few days after the flooding, like in July after the riots, there was nobody on the beach, on the promenade. But then people start to come again and again. I was surprised because I thought, especially in July, I thought maybe this mixed crowd will be destroyed by what's happened because, okay, it was, as you know, very violent. But people start again to come slowly. And it was the same with the flooding. First, people start again to come, but mostly it was not people cleaning up the beach. There was very few, citizen brigade coming to clean up the beach. It was mostly the municipality taking care of the beaches. And they did it 2 days after the flooding, which surprised me because I think maybe they should take their I don't know, these people to do something else in the cities that just clean up the beach. But of course, we were a week before the Easter weekend, so maybe they thought it was very important to have quite welcoming beach. I don't know if I answer your question. And
yes,
also,
thank you.
and of course, you cannot go to the sea because it was polluted by the sewage and also this Indian factory who start again flooding on the sea.
Thank you for that. Noor, your hand is up. You can go.
Yeah, thanks, Sapna, and thanks, Sophie. I've got sort of two connected questions, and I'm thinking about the order of asking them, but let me ask this one first. So the question is this, when one thinks about sort of public spaces, and clearly beaches and promenades are special places of interaction. So my question is the Durban beaches and the promenade distinctive in terms of the kind of public interaction that it creates? And I mean distinctive in relation to the rest of Durban. Are you making an argument about its distinctiveness? And then secondly, I wonder if you could say something about a bit more sort of layered kind of analysis, and I'll ask it this way: it's about gender, right? The impression one gets is of this sort of not quite ideal public space, but of sort of mutual interaction, and yet public spaces across South Africa mean different things, particularly for women. And I wonder whether, in your interactions with the women, particularly young Black women, feel the same about the kind of public nature of the space than men might, right? We are, after all, a country in which gender-based violence and sexual harassment is pervasive. If one were to kind of, use that lens into kind of getting a sense of what goes on the beaches and on the promenade, what might that reveal? Thanks.
Okay, I will start with a gender question. Of course, there is some, sometimes women are harassed by men, but I don't think it's a main element of this promenade. It's also a space of seduction. And for example, in the promenade, there is a coffee bar, who obviously is a place where women sit among themselves and drink something and look for the men who are walking around, So I think it's a really strong seduction place. and people dress up in this way, and also is a place for couple. And I think the fact that they put now student accommodation on the promenade, behind the promenade, on the OR Tambo Drive, increase this dimension of meeting place for young people, young men and women, and a place of seduction. I don't know if it's answer your question. Obviously, women won't start to go very early in the morning or late alone, early in the morning and late in the evening. But during the day, I don't think that it's really problematic. Yes, I think it's something special of this promenade and the beach in Durban. First, because it's really linked to the city. I think it has a strong link to the city and all the city. I mean, people are coming not only for the center of the city, but also from all the township by taxi every weekend. So really is a very attractive place for all the inhabitants. And it's really an open place. Everybody can find his place. I mean, there is food for everybody, place for, I don't know, leisure space for everybody. I think it's very special in this sense, and it has no restriction and no separation. I mean, in terms, not really in social class, maybe people who have a bit more money will bring their kids to Ushaka, but it's not so obvious actually. I think it's really, what strikes me is really an open space, and is very special, because I read articles, for example, in Cape Town and other places where there is fight for space in beaches, but it's not, I don't think it's the case in Durban. So only fight, it was related to the fishermen, I think. So the fact that really this space is a leisure space, and the impulse is to put out everybody who is walking around the sea, except when there is what is called the sardines fever. So the beach are closed down for fishing the sardines. But it is the only moment, I think, during the year that the beach is not a leisure place. I don't know if I answer.
Thank you.
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yeah, hi Sophie. Yeah, thanks for the interesting presentation. I just wanted to ask if you can elaborate a little bit about two things, maybe about the kinds of interactions that people are having across different racial backgrounds, and if that is linked to perhaps particular sites at the beach itself. So I'm wondering if there might be particular like physical infrastructures or spaces that, you know, force this kind of encounters more than others. Because when I saw, you know, some of the pictures that you showed, in a sense, were still showing, you know, people of different groups occupying those zones on their own. But I'm just wondering if you could speak perhaps in a bit more detail about yeah, how people are seeing each other. I think you alluded to perhaps when people are strolling and maybe making glances at each other. I just wanted to have a flavor of what are those kinds of interactions and how do they unfold and so on. Thanks.
Well, I think I say that I think is really a mixed crowd strolling or flânerie in the promenade. In the beach is slightly more complicated, but I think it's more that an habit or practical. For example, in South Beach, there is a lot of parkings for taxis. So it's not so, yeah, people coming by taxis from township go to the beach in front of the parking. So it's like there is a separation in the beaches, or racial separation, but it's not really true. It's just a practical reason that people go to these beaches, because they have to park the taxi somewhere. And I think there is another space who is more who is specific. I didn't mention it here. Is what is called in English the paddle swimming pool for kids. You know, when there is very few water. There is 2 of them along the promenade, and usually they are completely taken over, but by African women with their kids coming by taxi. And there is no Indian or white kids playing there. And that's really very specific, I would say. But I think it's much more in terms of social class than really racial differentiation. I think people with a bit of money will go to the swimming pool in Ushaka with their kids. And it's more people with no money because these places are free for kids. I don't know if I answer your question. There is still some differentiation of space, but not so much.
Yeah, no, you did. I think, yeah, that's interesting.
But I cannot describe every aspect, but one of aspect is for around kids, yes. Because there was all a discourse of this swimming pool for kids. The water is dirty, and you know. So we can also speak about the role of water in okay, I don't want to enter in this discussion, but okay. Yeah, water play a role, the dirty water in the kids' swimming pool.
We have a question from Nathan in the chat. He asked, during apartheid, was there any transgression of segregation on the seafront? In your work, have you come across that?
Probably there were, but I was not there, I have to say. But when I speak with different people about the experience of the beach and the promenade where they were kids, they say usually their parents take care of the rules because they want to give their kids good time on the beach and the promenade, not their kid to be humiliated publicly, or you know. So people are probably were quite respectful of the segregation. I don't know exactly. It's based on discourse interview I did.
Okay. Bridget, your hand is up, you can go.
Thanks. I just have a question that I guess sort of follows a little bit on Njogu and Noor and Linda's questions. I was curious, at least 2 of the photographs that you showed, the one of the procession and the one of the men with their boot open, looked as if they were taken from a window. And you speak of Lefebvre. Lefebvre has that chapter in rhythm analysis in which is called Seen from the Window, I was curious, it almost looked like your flats window. Or yeah. I wanted to know. And so I was curious to know, because, you know, Lefebvre in that essay speaks specifically about being slightly outside of the space of the urban space in which he's observing, and sort of watching it over time, looking at the different rhythms, right? And I was curious if, you know, that's a sort of way to think about the different, how a single space might be used at different times by different kinds of people, the street cleaners who come and clean and sweep those parking lots at another time of the day or whatever. And I'm curious if that was something that that you're working with at all. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I was at the beginning. I was not taking care of the night, for example. I mean, the rhythms was not very important in my observation. And then, of course, as you say, I took this picture from my own windows, and I can go down very quickly to join the crowd if I want. But I was not very aware of this question of rhythms. And actually, in terms of anthropology, and even I think for historian, it's quite new to be aware of what's happened during the night and to really go look more closely about night activities. And especially in anthropology, is quite recent, that people are looking for what's happened during the night, the music, the sound, who is going out during the night, and how the rhythm of the city is not only during the day, but it's happened a lot of things during the night. And so I thought it was interesting to introduce this story about the use of the night use of this space. But it's not the promenade; it's really the parkings. In the promenade, there is very few people. There is really maybe homeless people, but very few. But the parking can be really busy during the night, and it's really a men's space. There is very few women. But I think it's interesting when you are study cities, especially to take care of this day and night rhythms.
I have a question. Bridget says thanks in the conversation, so you've answered. Just about homelessness on the beach. So last time I went to Durban, there's a large homeless population, and there's a very clear kind of pushing of or policing of homeless people away from the beach. And is that something that you've encountered? And when we're thinking about how, you know, a week after the flood, the municipality came out and they're cleaning up the beach, are homeless people kind of something that also needs to be cleaned up? And if we're looking at, so you say it's not so much racial, but socioeconomic, is that something that we see there and you've seen in your work?
Yes, I think I mentioned the fishermen, who are people who are fishing not for pleasure, but really to catch something to eat. So that will be my first example of evicting, pushing out people who are not fitting this project of a leisure place. It's true that this space is controlled by the municipality. There is quite a lot of police, but there is still some during the week time when you walk there. You know there is a homeless people or hustler. You know each other, and you give them money or food or whatever. Who are like a figure of this promenade. But it's true there is also a control on the promenade of homeless people. But there is a lot of people spending the night on the among the bushes along the beach, and even in the beach, or washing their clothes in the beach and so on. But I think also the people who have is a space for middle class people, the promenade, middle class people for sport activity, and working class people. But I think people who have a lot of money don't go anymore to the promenade. They go to the north, Balito, it's you know, Umhlanga and these places, especially during the holidays. So big holidays like Christmas holidays. I don't know if it answered your question.
That did, yes, no, that did, thank you. Can we take one more round of questions before we close the session? Is there anyone else who wants to ask anything? You can ask in the chat, or you can, you know, ask. Okay, if we have no more questions, Sophie, thank you so much for sharing your work. I think it was a very interesting piece. I hope the questions were interesting that they posed to you. I think everyone here can agree that it was very interesting to see. Thank you so much for joining us and presenting. We really appreciate having you. Yeah.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us all the way from France, and your English was very good considering you were so anxious about it. It made a lot of sense.
Thank you.
So, thank you everyone for joining, and we'll see you at next week's seminar, same time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sophie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sophie.